Chapter 1. Some people said that a bullet, going close past a man's ear, sounded like a hornet. But Luke Jensen knew better than that, because he had heard plenty of them. What it sounded like was a bullet coming too blasted close to blowing his brains out. He kicked his feet free of the stirrups and left the saddle in a dive that landed him on the hard ground with a jolt he felt all through his body. He was getting too old for this, he thought, as he rolled behind a rock barely big enough to give him any cover. Another slug ricocheted off the rock with a wicked whine. Luke hadn't been expecting trouble, so he hadn't been riding with his Winchester across his saddle's pommel, as he did when he knew hell might start to pop. Nor had he had time to drag it from its sheath, as he was diving off the dun's back. That meant his only weapons were the twin Remington revolvers he carried in cross-draw holsters, and a sheathed knife on his left hip, just behind the gun on that side. None of them were any good for distance work. He thought back a few seconds to the moment when he had spotted a glint of reflected sunlight on top of a sandstone bluff in front of him. That warning had barely had time to register before the bullet buzzed past his ear. The bluff was at least 100 yards away. The Remingtons wouldn't carry that far, not with any degree of accuracy anyway. Luke looked to his left. The dun had bolted off in that direction, spooked not so much by the gunfire as by Luke's reaction to it. The horse, like Luke, was accustomed to violence. In one sense, they were partners in the bounty-hunting business. Another shot rang out in the hot, still air. It hit just in front of the rock and threw up a shower of dirt and grit that spilled over into Luke's face. He lowered his head and muttered a curse as he blinked. He had no idea who was trying to kill him, or how he was going to get out of this. A frown creased his forehead as a quick spattering of gunshots followed the latest crack of the rifle. Somebody else was horning in on this fight, which was fine with him. He could use the distraction. He surged to his feet and ran toward the dun. No more slugs ripped the air around him. He grabbed the horn, went into the saddle in a hurry, and leaned forward over the horse's neck to make himself a smaller target as he kicked it into a gallop. A cloud of dust boiled into the air near the bluff ahead of him. It headed to his right, telling him that a group of men on horseback were fleeing in that direction. He hauled the dun's head around and rode hard to intercept them. The bluff hemmed them in. Luke caught sight of 4 or 5 men as their mounts raced through the chaparral along its base. More men rode along the top of the bluff and fired down at the fleeing riders. The fugitives tried to veer away from the rise, but Luke had the angle on them from that direction. He had the dun's reins in his left hand. He used his right to draw one of the Remingtons and thumbed off a pair of shots. He didn't hope to hit anything, but rather to herd the riders back toward the bluff. So he was surprised when one of the men threw his arms in the air and pitched from the saddle in an obvious death sprawl. Luke didn't like killing a stranger when he didn't even know the reason for it, but one of this bunch had been the rifleman who nearly put a bullet through his head, so he wasn't going to lose a lot of sleep over it. He fired again. Without any warning, the 4 men who still fled abruptly disappeared. Luke didn't have any idea where they had gone until he drew closer and saw a dry wash twisting away across the West Texas landscape. The wash gave them the cover they needed to get away from the men on top of the bluff. Those men reined in and continued firing rifles and handguns toward the arroyo, but they were shooting blind. The bluff was too steep here for them to get their horses down. Luke thought about pursuing the men into the wash, but he decided there were too many places where they could stop and ambush him. Instead, he turned his horse and rode toward the man he had shot, who still lay motionless on the ground where he had landed next to a scrubby mesquite bush. As he brought the dun to a halt not far from the dead man, somebody hailed him from the top of the bluff.
"Stay right there, mister," the man called.
then disappeared as he turned his horse away.